9 experienced mountaineers walked into the Ural Mountains. 11 days later, they were found scattered in the snow with no signs of a struggle, no evidence of an attack, and one of them missing both eyes. And the Soviet government still won't fully explain how it happened. On January 23, 1959, 9 Soviet mountaineers, experienced climbers, not amateurs, set out to summit Otorten Peak in the northern Ural Mountains. Their goal was routine, a winter climb, difficult but achievable. They were supposed to report their safe return by February 12. They never did. When rescuers reached their camp, they found the tent torn open from the inside. 5 bodies were found in the snow nearby, some partially clothed, some barefoot in temperatures far below freezing. The other 4 weren't found until spring, scattered in the taiga, arranged in ways that made no sense. One lay face down under 4 feet of snow. One was found in a ravine miles away. One had no eyes. One had no tongue. And nobody, not the rescuers, not the Soviet authorities, not the declassified investigators who looked at this case decades later, has ever produced a single explanation that accounts for all of it. Here's what we know for certain. The expedition was called the Dyatlov Pass Group, named after its leader, Igor Dyatlov. He was 23 years old and was considered one of the best mountaineers in the region. Competent, cautious, respected. His team was mixed. 7 men, 2 women, all between 21 and 37, all experienced hikers. They left from the industrial city of Sverdlovsk on January 23, 1959, carrying detailed maps, supplies for 18 days, and a photography kit. Their plan was to reach Otorten Peak, modest summit in mountaineering terms, about 3,000 meters high, then return home by February 12. The route was challenging but well documented, and nothing about their goal was unusual or reckless. Their last confirmed contact was a postcard mailed February 4, written in good spirits. "We are in good health and mood," it said. The last entry in their group journal was dated February 1st. Then, silence. By February 20, when rescuers arrived at the camp, the snow had buried it and reset any story it might have told. What they found when they dug it out raised questions that have never been answered. The Soviet authorities launched an official inquiry almost immediately, and here's what the early investigation established. The tent, when found, was still anchored to the ground. It hadn't been knocked down by wind. It had been cut or torn open deliberately from the inside. The cut suggested the occupants had panicked and slashed their way out. Inside were sleeping bags, some still laid out, some still partially warm. Clothes were scattered across the floor. But the bodies outside weren't. Nearby, they were spread over a mile away down a slope toward forest. 5 of them were in light clothing, despite temperatures between -25 and -30 Celsius. One girl was found in just a nightshirt. Several showed signs of hypothermia. But then the autopsy reports contradicted that explanation. 3 of the 9 showed no signs of hypothermia at all. Instead, they had suffered severe trauma, broken ribs, a fractured skull, internal injuries that looked like the result of crushing force or a high-impact blow. The official Soviet inquiry concluded it was an unknown compelling force that made them flee the tent. Then it closed the case. That was 1959. The file was classified. And for decades, nobody on the outside knew those details existed. For 30 years, the Dyatlov Pass case stayed sealed. But in the late 1980s, as the Soviet government loosened its grip on information, declassified documents and journalist investigations began to reveal what really happened. And it's where the case splits into competing theories, each one defended by serious investigators who had access to evidence you and I will never see. Theory 1. They were killed by an avalanche. An avalanche could explain the scattered bodies, the severe trauma on some of them, the tent damage, and Otorten Peak does sit near steep slopes. But here's the problem. The official avalanche theory falls apart when you look at the location. Their camp was on a relatively gentle slope with no evidence of snow buildup. The trauma injuries don't match avalanche injuries. And an avalanche doesn't explain why they fled the tent in the middle of the night before the avalanche hit. Theory 2. They were attacked by locals. Maybe a Mansi indigenous group living in the region. Maybe there was a confrontation over territory. But the Mansi were known to be peaceful, and there's no evidence of any other people in the area. Theory 3, the one that dominates online forums, military weapons testing. The Soviets were conducting secret military experiments in the Urals in 1959. Maybe a thermal barg bomb or a classified military exercise went wrong. This explains why the case was classified, why the autopsy reports were sealed, why the government wanted it buried. But it's also almost pure speculation. There's no direct evidence. And some aspects of the deaths, the missing eyes and tongue, don't fit any known military weapon. Theory 4. Infrasound. Some researchers have proposed that infrasound waves too low for human hearing from wind patterns in the mountains could have induced panic and irrational behavior, causing them to flee the tent in terror. But this theory is hard to test and harder still to prove. Here's where it gets stranger. Some of the physical evidence suggests possibilities that don't fit any single theory. One body was found under 4 feet of snow, so much snow that he couldn't have been lying there when snow naturally fell. He was buried deliberately, or buried by another force. Radiation readings were taken on some of the bodies and allegedly came back elevated, though the original data has vanished, and only second-hand accounts survive. Several bodies showed strange discoloration on their skin, which some researchers have attributed to radiation exposure. But without the original bodies or medical records, it's impossible to verify. One survivor theory emerged. Maybe not all 9 died in the mountains. Maybe one of them or more survived and was living under an assumed name. This theory is almost impossible to disprove because there's no DNA database to test, no central record to check. The Soviet government has never released the original autopsy files. The bones were cremated. The photographs from the early rescue have inconsistencies. Some show bodies at locations that contradict later official statements. And the journal entries, the photographs taken by the group, the private letters, some are missing entirely. Some were edited. What remains is a puzzle with pieces from 5 different puzzles mixed in. In 2019, Russian authorities reopened the investigation. They hired a team led by prosecutor Ivan Kuznetsov to look at the case with fresh eyes. And after a year of work, they announced their conclusion: an avalanche. They claimed wind data and topographic modeling showed it was plausible. They said they had solved it. But almost every independent investigator, people who studied the site, who reviewed the evidence, who understood mountaineering, disagreed. The avalanche explanation still doesn't fit the facts. And some observers noticed the timing: Russia reopening the case right when international curiosity was rising again, then closing it quickly with an explanation that satisfied almost no one. So here's what we actually know. 9 people died. Most of them died of exposure to cold. Some suffered significant trauma. They fled their tent in the middle of the night. We don't know why. We don't know what made them think they had to run. And we don't know what happened to the bodies afterward, why they were arranged where they were found. The simplest explanation is avalanche combined with panic and exposure. The most alarming explanation is that something happened that the Soviet government was desperate to hide. The most honest answer is, we don't know. And unless Russia declassifies the original files, the unedited autopsy reports, the radiation readings, the investigation notes, we probably never will. The Dyatlov Pass Incident teaches us something uncomfortable. There are real events, witnessed by real people, documented in real investigation files, that we simply don't have answers for. Not because we lack the intelligence to solve them, but because the evidence is locked away. In this case, locked away by a government that had every reason to hide the truth. 65 years later, 9 people are still unexplained. Their families want answers. Researchers want answers. And Russia could give them by opening the files. The fact that they haven't, and that they seem eager to declare the case closed with an explanation that doesn't fit, tells you something about how institutions handle mysteries they want to make disappear. The Dyatlov Pass incident isn't solved because someone doesn't want it solved. And that might be the most unsettling fact of all. The Dyatlov Pass case remains officially unsolved, though not for lack of evidence, for lack of access to it. If you found this investigation compelling, subscribe for more deep dive case files where history refuses to give up its answers easily.